Hashtag the fortnight that rewrote her name. Applause thunders down. It's a massive upset. She's just knocked out the reigning champion in the round before this one. She's the kind of competitor who's impossible not to root for, every emotion visible on her face. But no one in the stands had any idea what was coming. Imagine it, a 21-year-old steps onto the most iconic court in tennis, and most of the crowd can't even say her name correctly. 10 days later, that same crowd is on its feet, waving flags nobody remembers bringing, while people back home set alarms for the middle of the night just to watch her highlights on loop. This wasn't only a tennis story, it felt like watching history rewrite itself in real time. And the real twist isn't the victory. It's what happened afterward, in defeat. Hashtag before the storm. 8 days before that hush fell over center court, nobody had her circled on their bracket. She was a footnote, maybe good for a round or two before quietly heading home, forgotten once the second week began. That was the script everyone else had written. She just refused to follow it. She'd come up playing on courts that weren't always regulation size, sometimes shared with other sports, in a country where tennis talent has always outrun the facilities to support it. Stepping onto grass this storied, this green, nobody knew how those nerves would play out. Then came her first real challenge, the defending champion, a player who doesn't just win, she takes opponents apart with surgical precision. For a set and a half, it looked like she'd do exactly that again. Then, quietly, something shifted, so subtly even commentators nearly missed it. Her eyes stayed locked on the baseline. Her swings got bigger, her footwork got quicker, and point by point, the wall she was supposed to hit simply wasn't there. On the final point, the champion's return sailed long. For 1 full second, silence. Then the arena erupted, because an unknown had just beaten a legend, and everyone there knew they'd witnessed something they'd talk about for years. By the next morning, it wasn't just a score, it was front-page news across the Philippines. Office workers set alarms 2 hours early for replays. Students with exams the next morning stayed up anyway. Nobody wanted to miss it. Hashtag unfinished business. The story should have ended quietly there, one great win, a nice headline, then normal service resuming. Instead, her fourth-round opponent turned out to be someone who reads grasscourt tennis better than almost anyone left in the draw, a Wimbledon finalist from 2 years prior, flat, fast, and ruthlessly efficient on this surface, the type of player grass seems built for. There was buried history between them too. Months earlier, on a hard court in Dubai, the young Filipina had beaten her comfortably. Her opponent had carried that defeat quietly for 5 months, waiting for the right stage to settle the score. So when the draw paired them again, this became more than an underdog tale, it turned personal. The crowd that gathered was louder and sharper than a typical fourth-round audience, buzzing with the sense they were about to see something historic. She glanced up at flags that hadn't existed in that stadium a week earlier. Her opponent never looked at the crowd once. The match opened with a wide serve winner and a premature roar of celebration, as if the fairy tale would simply keep writing itself. It didn't. A missed forehand a couple of games later, a couple of holds from the other side, and what had felt like a coronation turned into a genuine fight, momentum swinging back and forth like a card trick no one could follow. She had the crowd, her opponent had the games. That gap is exactly where matches like this get decided. Hashtag set 1, lost a marathon rally at 30. All ended when a return clipped the line, break point, then a break, after a bold return off a big second serve. For a moment it looked like another chapter in the fairy tale run. But her opponent, unshaken by the earlier loss or this stage, broke straight back with almost bored composure, the calm of someone who'd survived exactly this kind of pressure before. Trading break points followed, an uncharacteristic error handed over the set-defining break, and the more experienced player closed it out 6-4 with a composure that made the chaos before it look effortless. At the changeover, for the first time all tournament, a real question hung in the air: was this where the run ended? Hashtag the turnaround. She didn't know it yet, but the next stretch would flip that question upside down. Few remembered that earlier in this same tournament, in a match that barely made headlines outside her home country, she'd already come back from a set down once. That history is exactly why her coaching box stayed calm even as the scoreboard suggested panic. She returned for the third set transformed, freer, more aggressive, stepping inside the baseline to steal time on second serves. The crowd rebuilt its energy cautiously, leaning forward despite themselves. She held to love, resetting the entire rhythm of the match. Deep into the next game, her returns landed deeper than anything she'd tried all match, and a flat strike down the middle brought up deuce, then deuce again. A lucky net cord bounce fell her way, and without hesitation she ripped a cross-court winner for the break. This time the roar was relief, not celebration. She wobbled briefly serving to consolidate, down 15-30, but 2 clean first serves and a forehand winner sealed the hold. In the stands, a small group of Filipino fans who'd flown in on short notice filmed with shaking hands. Her opponent kept fighting, trading holds, but the momentum had shifted for good. A set point on serve, wide serve, short reply, clean forehand into the open court, leveled the match. Somewhere in the crowd, a flag was raised so high its owner nearly toppled over. #the decider. It should have been the moment to exhale, the turning point where the underdog story wrote its own ending. Tennis doesn't work that way. The final set felt heavier and tighter than anything before it, because her opponent had lived through a deciding set on this court before, in her own run to a Wimbledon final 2 years earlier. She hadn't, not at this level, not with this much on the line. She kept swinging with the same fearlessness that had toppled a champion days earlier, but her opponent began reading her patterns half a step early, anticipating the cross-court forehand before it left the strings. That small adjustment changed everything. Midway through the set, after an entire game's worth of held breath, her opponent finally earned the break she'd been hunting, sealed by a backhand that clipped the tape and fell the wrong way. Center court didn't turn on her, it went quiet instead, willing her to find something extra. For a few games it looked possible. She saved break points with fearless first serves, chased down apparent winners, kept smiling between points. But serving at 3-4, in the toughest stretch of the 2.5-hour battle, a long rally ended with a backhand sailing wide on break point. The break came, and with it, the sense that the match had reached its final stage. Serving for the match at 5-3, her opponent closed it out the way only someone who's reached a Wimbledon final knows how: 1 clean serve, 1 final forehand. Final score, 6-4, 4-6, 6-3. 2.5 hours of the best tennis the tournament had produced, and it was over. What actually happened next. Here's the part most people don't expect. She didn't collapse or cry. She walked straight to the net, shook hands, shared a warm embrace with the woman who'd just ended her run, and the entire stadium rose to its feet. Not for a trophy lift, but for a 21-year-old who had spent 2 weeks rewriting what people thought possible for her. She left London as the first player from her country ever to reach the 4th round at Wimbledon, a record that hadn't existed 2 weeks before. Clips of her win over the champion racked up millions of views before she'd even left the grounds, and footage of her comeback against the finalists spread just as fast. Somewhere in that second week, this had stopped being just a sports story. The real twist. The scoreboard says she lost. Watch those 2.5 hours again, though, and you see something else: a player who refused to be intimidated by a legendary name across the net, who clawed back from a set down against someone with real personal motivation for revenge, who pushed a deciding set to the final game while an entire country stayed up past midnight to watch. Her opponent, meanwhile, had finally answered the one result that had bothered her all season, and would need that same composure again days later, in the quarterfinals, against another dangerous opponent in another full house. No time to celebrate a win or mourn a loss. One door closes and another opens immediately. Her coach said little afterward, just stood by the tunnel, arms crossed, watching her walk off. She picked up her bag, took one last look at center court. The applause hadn't stopped, and by most accounts, it still hasn't, not really. 2 weeks earlier, no one across the net from her would have thought twice about her name. That's no longer true, and it changed in front of the entire sport, not on some forgotten outer court, but on center court itself. Twice, against a defending champion, then against a former finalist, in front of cameras that had barely learned to pronounce her name before that first point sailed into the London sky. Results fade fast in professional tennis, that's the brutal truth of the sport. New tournaments and new headlines arrive next month, and most players who have one great week get forgotten if they don't follow it up. But some results carry weight regardless of what comes next, because this one never measured a ranking or a bracket position. It measured belief, hers, and an entire nation's, built match by match over a fortnight nobody saw coming, and one that nobody who watched it will forget anytime soon. She walked down the tunnel, out of the light and the noise, while center court reset itself for whatever came next, the way tournaments always do. But this time, it won't be forgotten so easily, because everyone in that building now knows a name they didn't know 2 weeks before. And if you were paying attention, you already know they won't stop watching for it.